أهلا بكل الذين ينضموا للاستماع إلى راديو بلدي، أول راديو عربي أمريكي ويعنى بقضايا العرب في المهجر. برامجنا في راديو بلدي كل يوم جمعة من 8 وحتى 9 صباحا مع ليلى الحسيني في بث حي ومباشر عبر WNZK راديو 690 AM. صباح الخير بلدي، صباح الخير لكل مستمعينا.
Welcome to Radio Baladi, the first Arab, Middle Eastern and American simulcast radio show. Radio Baladi is broadcast every Friday morning on WNZK 690 AM from 8 until 9 Eastern Time on Good Morning Michigan with Layla Al-Husseini. Our call-in number 248-557-3300. And now, stay tuned for the best radio talk show on Arab and American issues with your host, Layla Al-Husseini.
I am Atef Gawad. Join me the first Friday of each month at 8 a.m. Eastern Time. I will be discussing some of the most important issues and events in the Middle East live on America's Voice of the Arabs. WNZK 690 AM and WDMV 700 AM. Good morning. In his speech to the UN generalists, President Biden reiterated his support for a two-state solution. He said the two-state solution is best for both Israel and the Palestinians. However, he said conditions are not right at this time for the two-state solution. He also said we should not lose hope. The two-state solution could happen in the future. In the next hour, we will discuss the what, why, how, and the future for both Israel and the Palestinians. To do that, we have a group of distinguished experts and guests. We have alphabetically Mr. Said Arikat, a long-time Washington-based Palestinian journalist. We have Dr. Edmund Ghareeb, an expert on American and Middle Eastern affairs. We have Mr. Ray Hanania, an award-winning journalist and correspondent. And we have Dr. Brad Roth, professor of political science at Wayne State University. Before we start our conversation, I want to let our audience know that we are coming to you not just on radio, but also on Facebook through the application of Zoom. You can go to Facebook, the page of US Arab Radio, and you can watch us live on video as well. My first question is for everybody. So the question is, why, as you heard, why conditions are not right at this moment to have a Palestinian state or to activate a two-state solution, as the President Biden said? Let's start with an answer from Dr. Ghareeb, because I know he is staying with us only for one half of the show.
Good morning to you and to your guests. It's a pleasure to be with you. This is a very important issue. I think probably from the perspective of this administration, this is not a priority. In fact, this administration was not going to be paying much attention to the Palestinian-Israeli conflict and was forced to begin to pay some attention after the eruption of the fighting between Hamas, Gaza and Israel. And that forced the administration to pay some attention to this issue. I think the realities are that the Biden administration has many other issues, many more important issues to focus on from its perspective. And that's one. You have the domestic issues, whether it has to do with the illegal immigration, whether it has to do with COVID and its consequences, the division that exists within the United States between the Republicans and the Democrats. The United States has become, in many ways, a divided country. But more importantly, when it comes to international issues, the United States is very much concerned about what is perceived and seen to be as the Chinese threat. China is becoming the major issue of concern. We saw as a result of one of the consequences of that may have been the withdrawal from Afghanistan. And so the United States is focusing more on that issue. And of course, with the president, and this is a change from the position that was adopted by President Trump, talked about that he still believes the solution is the Palestinian state next to the Israeli state. The question is, how real is this? Because on the one hand, he spoke about, he said, as you pointed out, he said, I continue to believe that a two-state solution is the best way to ensure Israel's future as a Jewish democratic state living in peace alongside a viable, sovereign, and democratic Palestinian state. That may be his belief, but his actions, however, are quite different. We are in reality a long way, as he also pointed out, from that moment, but we must never allow ourselves to give up the possibility of progress. If you listen to Secretary Blinken also, he said, I don't think we are in a place where getting to some kind of negotiation for what ultimately I think has to be the result, which is a two-state solution. So basically, while the administration, President Biden, we see here a paradoxical statement. There is a belief in two-state solution and a Middle East peace plan, but no hope for achieving this anytime or to even pursue one in the near future. Of course, the realities on the ground are also a factor, the divisions that exists among the Palestinians, the weakness of the Arab position, the changes that have been taking place, the close rapprochement between some Arab states and Israel. All of this also contributes to this situation.
Dr. Roth, what do you think the conditions are not right at this moment?
Well, there will never be any absence of excuses for the number of for inaction in all of this situation. Clearly, the administration can point out many suboptimal conditions regarding this: the division of authority within the Palestinian community, the continuing control of Gaza by Hamas, the legitimacy crisis of the Palestinian Authority, and the lack of elections in the West Bank. There are other kinds of conditions, of course, that are unfavorable politically from the standpoint of the Biden administration. The political capital to invest in this is perhaps not sufficient for the Biden administration at the moment. But the bottom line is this fetishization of the two-state solution. The two-state solution has taken on this sort of place in people's consciousness that substitutes for a real solution to the problem of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, which is the realization of mutual self-determination of the two peoples on equal terms, irrespective of whether it's a two-state solution or a one-state solution. By talking about it constantly in terms of the two-state solution as the end, it makes it possible for the Israeli government to mold the question in such a way as to limit any possibility of genuine Palestinian self-determination.
Mr. Hanania.
Yes. I have a much more pessimistic view, mainly because I've covered politics 45 years in the U.S. The real problem, in my opinion, isn't so much can we get the Israelis and Palestinians to agree to anything. The real problem is the United States and the fact that the future of Israel and Palestine is driven by American politics, and American politics has embraced Israel. And as long as Hamas, the word exists, the United States will never really support a two-state solution. In my overview and analysis of everything, there really is no difference between Trump and Biden. Trump just said to us what many Americans already think, and Biden is saying to us what he hopes will calm us down to avoid conflict. What really needs to happen, I think, is that Palestinians need to refocus on the United States and win over more members of Congress, win over more American public opinion. That's the only thing that's going to change anything. So, they throw out this term two-state solution, which I personally think is the only solution. But they throw it out as a medicinal, let's calm things down. Maybe we'll get the Arabs to be happy. We'll tell them, oh, I'm not like Trump. I support the two-state solution. I think that's all just polemics and rhetoric. And there is no plan to achieve the two-state solution. There is no plan to bring peace. The only plan that exists now is driven by the United States, and that is to maintain the status quo and to allow Israel to respond anytime there is violence from Hamas, and to block any effort in the international community, including at the UN, to punish Israel for overstepping its bounds. That's a terrible situation, I think, regardless of who is president.
Mr. Arikat.
Thank you, Atef, and thanks to your guests. They really laid out quite a panoramic view of why times, as the president said, is not ready, it's not ripe, and so on. And the truth of the matter is that conditions have never been ripe for the two-state solution, because that is the position of the United States, is supporting Israel. Israel is a settler colonial state. It's not going to give up 1 inch of Palestine. The moment it gives up 1 inch of Palestine, it will cease to exist. That is the reality. The two-state solution have been a good euphemism, maybe a smokescreen. It kicks the can down the road, one administration after the other. But as we have seen, as we have witnessed, all of us, in the 90s, conditions were ripe. Conditions were, there to conclude, to bring about a two-state solution. Did not happen. It did not happen during the George W. Bush administration. Did not happen during the Obama administration, and throughout, and the Trump administration, and now the Biden administration. It is all the same. And in fact, even the status quo is nonsense. There is no status quo. There is no status quo. Israel steals the land every day. Drives Palestinians out every day. It changes facts on the ground every day. It kills Palestinians. I mean, this week alone, they killed 6 or 7 people, kids, and so on. They drove people out of their homes and so on. So, I mean, this is also another wrong euphemism that they use, the status quo, the status quo. There's been no status quo. I can cite one incident after the other every day that shows that there is no status quo. The fact of the matter is that Israel is a gangster state. It conducts itself in this fashion, and the United States empowered it. It has always empowered it, and it will continue to empower it. So the whole concept of the two-state solution was no more than a smokescreen, no more than a euphemism to really keep empowering Israel. But, sure, they have a lot on their plate, for sure, but that's the United States. It is the largest power in the history of man. It can walk and chew gum at the same time if they wanted to. It's from time to time, it probably expresses some sort of, they're a little upset over this or over that, like yesterday when the settlers, and they are really just marauding group of gangsters. The settlers went in and killed, burned, and so on, Palestinians in Hebron. So the U.S. administration said, but this ought to stop. But they never do anything to stop it. And as long as the U.S. it controls, in essence, it controls what goes and what does not go on the international stage. And nothing would happen. I mean, we have statements coming out by different countries and different groups and the UN and this organization and that organization, human rights groups and so on, day in and day out. But the U.S. has cuddled it. It looks, it tears down any effort that happens on the human rights level. It calls everybody that stands in the face of Israel or points something as anti-Semitic and so on. We saw a great example yesterday with Kamala Harris, who basically, a student was saying that Israel, commits genocide, and then, we saw all this blackmail. So I just want to emphasize, Israel is a gangster state. It is being empowered by a group of blackmailers in this country, every time you do anything. So that's what happened. What the Palestinians have to do, really, is disabuse themselves of this two-state solution. It was never a reality. It will never be a reality. So yes, the conditions are not ripe. They were never ripe, will not be ripe anytime in the future.
So you guys are pessimistic in one way or the other, all of you. My next question after the break, we have to go to a quick break right now, but my next question is also for everybody, and we will start with Dr. Roth. And the question is, Mr. Biden said there is still hope. So the only one here who is hopeful is Mr. Biden, not any one of us. But for how long should the Palestinians wait? The passage of time since 1948 is turning the Palestinians into a group of Kurds, a people without a state. We will discuss that question when we come back.
When it comes to reproductive medicine, IVF Michigan fertility centers are the recognized leaders. With locations in Bloomfield Hills and 5 other cities in Michigan and Ohio, IVF has experts in all aspects of the field. As a founding member of IVF Michigan Fertility Centers, Dr. Nicholas Shama is one of the leading reproductive endocrinologists in Michigan and Ohio. Dr. Shama has performed over 10,000 IVF cases and has helped thousands of couples fulfill their dreams of parenthood. American board certified in both obstetrics and gynecology and reproductive endocrinology and infertility, Dr. Nicholas Shama is a very caring, compassionate, expert physician that understands not only the medical but also the emotional toil of infertility on its patients. When it's time, get personalized care from Dr. Nicholas Shama at IVF Michigan Fertility Centers in Michigan and Ohio. Call toll-free 855-952-9600, 855-952-9600. ArabNews.com, bringing you breaking news from across the Middle East and the latest on Arabs in America. Get inside the latest headlines with expert analysis and insights at ArabNews.com. Join over 5 million Facebook fans and over 10 million monthly readers. ArabNews.com, news that matters to you.
While we've been staying safe at home, scientists have been on a journey. The destination, a COVID-19 vaccine. This journey began decades ago with research into other coronaviruses. Scientists built from there with months of research and development, cooperation with other experts worldwide, and clinical trials on tens of thousands of volunteers of diverse race, age, and health status. They arrived at a safe, effective vaccine, and hundreds of thousands in Michigan have already been vaccinated. But the next step is ours. We need to get the vaccine when we can. Keep wearing masks correctly and taking precautions until we reach our destination, freedom from COVID-19 and getting back to the lives we love. Discover the facts for yourself at michigan.gov/COVID vaccine. A message from the Michigan Department of Health and Human Services.
I am Atef Gawad. Join me the first Friday of each month at 8 a.m. Eastern Time. I will be discussing some of the most important issues and events in the Middle East live on America's Voice of the Arabs. WNZK WNZK 690 AM and WDMV 700 AM.
Welcome back to our discussion on Radio Baladi. We are talking about the two-state solution and statements made by President Biden, who said that, yes, conditions are not right at this time, but there is hope. There is always hope that there could be a state, a Palestinian state in the future. My question now is, for how long should the Palestinians wait? The passage of time since 1948 is turning the Palestinians into Kurds. In other words, a people without state. Dr. Roth.
Yeah, well, to pose the question as how long to wait presupposes that there's something to do. And the difficulty is that any action by the Palestinians which would entail recourse to violence would probably, in the final analysis, only make the Palestinian situation worse on the ground, because the structure of the situation does not really allow Palestinians to inflict any significant damage on the Israeli military establishment or the fundamental Israeli institutions that maintain the status quo. And on the other hand, attacks on soft targets, which are accessible, are the very kinds of things that cause the enemies of the Palestinian cause to double down and gain support for the idea of a conception of security that is all about protecting civilians from direct attacks by missiles and so on. So the question is how to reconfigure the situation. I think one of the encouraging aspects of all of this is just the transformation of people's consciousness about the nature of race and colonialism that we see emerging. And the ability to use the word apartheid, I think, is quite remarkable. It was only a few years ago when everyone invoking the word apartheid would be simply excoriated. And you'll recall that Jimmy Carter wrote a book with that word in the title, really only speaking in hypothetical terms about this being apartheid, and was attacked roundly for it. Now you have Human Rights Watch putting out a report characterizing the situation as apartheid. You have LL.M, the Israeli human rights organization, characterizing the situation as apartheid. And so if there is hope in this situation, it's hope for a transformation of people's consciousness about the fundamental stakes of the situation, which have to do fundamentally not with the partition of territory as such, but reunification of the concept of Palestinian self-determination. We have a situation where Palestinians are conceptually as well as physically fragmented into 5 different compartments of residents of the West Bank, residents of the Gaza Strip, residents of East Jerusalem, diaspora Palestinians, and Arab citizens of Israel. As long as people continue to think about the issue in those terms, it will be impossible to actually have any kind of plan to realize Palestinian self-determination.
Mr. Said Arikat.
I think, Brad really laid it out quite articulately. But I look at it also a bit different. The Palestinians should not wait. There is no light at the end of this tunnel in terms of the two-state solution. I think they ought to take some of the stuff that Brad said, which is, they are fragmented, they are compartmentalized in maybe 5 different compartments or living conditions and so on. They need to seriously seek ways to unite, sort of redraw the national program, how to end this nightmare that has gone on for a very, very long time. So they should begin with themselves. They should, do away with the illusions of the trappings of the state that we have seen with a very dysfunctional semi-government that really basically does the sort of sub work of the occupation and so on. The Palestinian Authority look after their own national efforts and how to basically marshal resources to move forward. I'm not that pessimistic. I think I am optimistic. I think that as Brad said, there's the word apartheid, for instance, that was almost a taboo to use only a few years ago. Now it has been clearly used and clearly proven, not only used, because there is no other way to describe it. That's what it is. And there's a great deal of support in the United States. The Palestinian cause has always had support. I mean, I remember when I was a student in the 70s in the Bay Area, in California, there was a great deal of support for the Palestinians then. The problem is, how do you sort of utilize this support to move forward? So there is a great deal of support. People understand the justice of the Palestinian cause. What we see in Congress today, with the progressives and so on, that would not have been, even thought of just a few years ago. So there is a realization that the only solution is for these two people to live together, in a one democratic country where all issues can be addressed. They go on to sort of aid a proper way of living forward together and so on. So there are things that are happening that causes one to be optimistic. Israel is more and more, with every passing day, it becomes exactly what it is, which is a brutal settler colonial state that will only thrive on conflict and simply destroying its enemy. It will talk about Iran. It will talk about many things. You listen to their officials and so on, whether it's Lapid or the Israeli Prime Minister Bennett, who's a settler leader anyway. They talk about everything else, but they don't talk about the Palestinians. They don't talk about the elephant in the room. So, in short, the Palestinians need to basically should not wait, but they should accelerate their resistance to the Israeli occupation in every possible way. I'm not suggesting that they go on a violent rampage and so on. I'm saying that they should not be cooperating with the Israeli occupation. They should find the creative ways and means, as they did during the Intifada of 1987, when they were able to respond to these challenges imposed by the occupation. So to answer your questions in one term, they should not wait at all.
Dr. Ghareeb, what do you think?
Generally, I think it's very difficult right now to have two-state solution, taking into account what Israel has been doing. Israel has been building settlements. These settlements have expanded in the West Bank, making it very difficult. If you take a look at the settlements and where they are. And Israel is trying to even gain more control, expand these settlements, and makes it, the West Bank looks like almost Swiss cheese. How can you create a state and to a viable state? And that's going to be one of the major problems. The two-state solutions appears right now as unrealistic, undesirable to many Palestinians. Palestinians are increasingly coming to believe that it's not likely that they are going to see a state, a viable state anytime in the real near future. Yes, there are changes. The changes are very significant. What we have seen, what Professor Roth has mentioned, what Said has mentioned, there has been a change in the United States. We're seeing individuals, groups within the United States, Asian Americans, African Americans, Latinos, who are expressing support for the Palestinian cause and Palestinian rights and for the right of self-determination. Yet at the same time, the establishment in the United States has not changed. We saw recently, for example, the effort to try to block the aid to the Iron Dome, the $1 billion. There was an attempt by some members of Congress, but then it was quickly put aside, and it was approved by the House. Now we have Senator Rand Paul is basically blocking, for his own reasons, basically this $1 billion, and so that makes it shows that at least there are changes. The other changes is that the support for BDS, despite the efforts by a number of states in the United States to try to pass laws that make it very difficult for people to support BDS. But we have seen universities where there are a large number of Jewish students have supported BDS. Jewish students, some Jewish organizations have also expressed their support. I also agree that one of the main things, if there's going to be a change, the change has to take place also on the ground. That means first among the Palestinians themselves. The Palestinians need to reunify despite their differences that exist, they have to unify their position, their stand, and basically we saw what happened in Gaza. The fact that the conflict took place, that the fact that this appeared to have diverted the United States attention to us briefly and led to the focus on this issue shows that what happens on the ground is extremely important. Also, so I agree with what Mr. Hanania said earlier, and that is the need for the Palestinians and for the Arabs to make their voices heard in the United States. Unless you do that, unless you continue, because there has been some sympathy and support among the public for a long time, although it's not, it has not led to changes in U.S. policy. Nevertheless, now there are new circumstances, there's a new environment. The fact that ultimately what's happening within the Jewish community is extremely important. There's concern, some because of principled reasons. There are those who believe that what Israel is doing violates even what the positions that many Jewish people stood for, the right of people to fight against discrimination, to fight against what happened to the Jews in the Second World War, and that's why, in part, it contributed to the support for Israel in the West. There was a moral position, but what we see now from the position of the Western governments, many Western governments, is an immoral position. There's a lot of hypocrisy. There was a report recently that even in Europe, which has a more balanced position on the Palestinian-Israeli issue, 700 European financial institutions have financial relationships with 50 businesses in the West Bank and in the settlers, with the settlers basically, and that this is in the tens of billions of dollars. So there's need for a lot of work. And I think what you're doing, bringing this, for example, your program is also extremely important. The fact that we have people who are coming to speak about the rights of the Palestinian people and the issues of concern for them. And there is, as I said, and this is, I think, is significant, the fact that many Jews also, for political reasons, because they want to see the continuation of an Israeli state, believe that unless there is a viable Palestinian state, that this is going to lead either to an apartheid state, one-state solution. If this state is a democratic state, then that's brings the end of a Jewish state from their perspective. And if it is a one state that as we're beginning to see now, where Israeli law continues to apply to the West Bank, for example, where Israel continues to occupy the sea, the borders, and the air over Gaza, you don't have really any chance for a viable Palestinian state. So there are elements for hope, but at the same time, we see also a continuation of the status quo that has existed and an expansion of it over the past few decades.
When we come back after the break, I will ask Mr. Ray Hanania about the delay. If Mr. Biden says the two-state solution is best for Israel as a Jewish and democratic state, so why the delay? The passage of time bring closer the prospects of an apartheid state for Israel. So why should Israel delay? When we come back.
Get ready for an amazing experience at Ishtar Restaurant on 15 Mile Road in Sterling Heights. Enjoy excellent hospitality from owners Ali Al-Baghdadi and Fatty Bottom, serving the best in Mediterranean food. Try Chef Ali Al-Baghdadi's famous shawarma, the best Iraqi grills and food, and the best Arabic and international dishes. Dine in our authentic atmosphere or take out. Call 586-698-2585 or check us out on Facebook. Ishtar Restaurant practices all CDC CDC guidelines and is open every day 11 a.m. to 10 p.m. Have an amazing experience today at Ishtar Restaurant, 3625 15 Mile Road, Sterling Heights.
Are your hands feeling numb? Do you feel pain opening up a jar, turning a key? Are you noticing that your elbow and your shoulder are becoming stiff? Or were you recently injured in your arm? Hello, I'm Dr. Abdulmajid Katranji, and at the Katranji Hand Center, which just recently opened down the street from the Somerset Mall, we can provide you with the latest in hand, wrist, elbow, and shoulder care. Visit us at www.katranjihandcenter.com to learn the latest techniques that we have to offer you, and I look forward to taking care of you.
Visit us in Troy at 1565 West Big Beaver Road, Building F, or call Katranji Hand Center for an appointment at 248-869-4263. That's 248-869-4263. Life is a nonprofit charity that's provided humanitarian aid and development to people and communities for over 25 years, regardless of race, color, religion, or cultural background. When disaster occurs here or around the world, Life for Relief and Development rushes in to provide food, medical aid, and shelter to those in need. Please help improve these efforts. Make your tax-deductible donation to Life now at lifeusa.org or call 248-424-7493.
I am Atef Gawad. Join me the first Friday of each month at 8 a.m. Eastern Time. I will be discussing some of the most important issues and events in the Middle East live on America's Voice of the Arabs. WNZK 690 AM and WDMV 700 AM.
Welcome back to Radio Baladi. We are discussing the two-state solution, and my question now goes to Mr. Ray Hanania. Before that, I want to thank Dr. Edmund Ghareeb, who just had to leave us. Also, Mr. Ray Hanania is correspondent for Arab news, so he is well versed in the topic that we are discussing. And the question is, Mr. Biden said in his statements before the UN General Assembly that the two-state solution is best for Israel's future as a Jewish and democratic state. If that's the case, why the delay? The passage of time bring closer the prospects of an apartheid state for Israel. Mr. Hanania.
Thanks, Atef. The use of saying why the delay actually presumes that there's an effort to actually do something. And in all reality, there is no effort to do anything. What all we really see from any administration, Biden, Trump, Obama, have been rhetoric to kind of soothe the situation and continue the status quo. In my opinion, there's no alternative to the two-state solution. And that in the definition of that, I see the creation of a Palestinian state. So however that happens, I think that at some point needs to be done. But the settlers are, I think, a terrorist organization. Israel's government does practice a form of apartheid. I think those are facts. And the worst part about it is that these things happen without any response from the United States. There are 435 members in the U.S. Congress. We're only able to get 9 votes on issue, which leaves us 426 votes. Maybe 2 of them voted absent. So there are 424 congressional votes and the lack of will from a president, Democrat or Republican. So there is never going to be any movement until we change that dynamics. Breadcrumbs are not bread. So as much as I give the 9 members of Congress, Rashida, Betty McCollum, Marie Newman, all of them, I give them credit for standing up. It's not easy to do that, but that's breadcrumbs. And what we really need is bread. And I think the real solution is, the Palestinian activists are dysfunctional when it comes to politics. They're very good at having heflas. They're very good at raising money. They're very good at protesting. They're even very good at singing Alla Del Ona when they need to fill the void. But what they're not good at is influencing American politics. What they're not good is convincing Americans of what Americans believe already deep down, that there's an unfairness against the Palestinians. And we're incapable as Palestinians of changing the mind of Americans. We should be asking ourselves, why? Why haven't we been able to win the support of the American people? We get 40%. I think the problem is with us. I think we're divided. I think we're divisive. I think that we bring that old school, we're physically here in the United States, but mentally we're still back home. We are acting as if we're still back in the Middle East, and we're not there. We're in a different environment. We're in a place where we need to learn how to fight politics tooth and nail, and we just don't do that. And no matter what we say or do, this situation is going to last another 73 years, because I remember when I first got involved 45 years ago as a young student. I look around the table and I see the same people, I see the same organizations, and I see the same issues. To me, the real problem is with us. We need to change and do something different. I'm not sure we're capable of doing it, or that we have the leaders to help us do that.
Okay, I'm going to take your answer and split it in two. The first part, I want to go to Mr. Said Arikat and ask him about the division. We are divided, Mr. Hanania said, and he also previously said that Hamas may be an obstacle, the real obstacle to a solution. So for Mr. Said Arikat, the question is Hamas a real obstacle to the prospect of establishing a Palestinian state? And for Dr. Roth, I want to later to talk about the dynamics of the US Congress. Let's first hear from Mr. Arikat.
Well, Atef, saying that Hamas is an obstacle to the two-state solution, that is presuming that there is a two-state solution, and then somehow Hamas is really standing in the way. Remember, Hamas emerged because of the Israeli occupation. The Israeli occupation and the brutality of that Israeli occupation during the Intifada, because Hamas is besieged and isolated and so on. Certainly political powers will emerge and so on, as we have seen with Hamas. And we should not forget that, in fact, early on in the 80s, Israel sort of supported that kind of a challenge to the PLO, because the PLO was nationalistic, the PLO was international in its reach out and so on. And, maybe this group will be, localized and so on. And in many ways, it had proven to be so. And then, we remember how Sharon decided to pull out, lock, stock, and barrel, and just leave it as such. So what do you expect? That's what happened in the vacuum. There is a physical isolation of Gaza from the rest of from the West Bank, at least, Israel through right in the middle. So this is really, I think, just another way of saying, look, it is the Palestinian division themselves is what's holding the two-state solution. One, in fact, there are no prospects for the two-state solution. Certainly, Hamas has its own agenda. It has its own resources. It also feels maybe that it has assumed a position of power in Gaza, and maybe will not, dispense with it. Hamas is, after all, is part and parcel of the Muslim Brotherhood. They seek to have their own emirate, and they did, and so on. It's a very complex issue. But to say that they are the obstacle for realizing the two-state solution is also nonsense. The only obstacle for realizing the two-state solution, because really this concept was never ever developed to say we are going to give the Palestinians, a contiguous patrimony to call their own homeland and so on. This was never really worked out. It was, an international way, to soothe, as your guests used the term, to soothe the problem, to kick the can down the road and so on, without any thought on how this two-state solution will physically emerge, and how this two-state solution would be viable. Everybody talks about a viable two-state solution, a viable Palestinian state, a contiguous Palestinian state, much like, but in fact, as Edmund said before he left, it's like a Swiss cheese. How are you going to have a two-state solution? So this is really begs the question. The question that what needs to be done now is to lift that horrible siege on Gaza that has existed for 15 years. You need to end that right now because people are suffering. That's what you need to do. That the priority is not whether Hamas is an obstacle or not. The priority ought to be how you can end this horrible nightmare of people besieged, denied ability to work, denied ability to travel and go for medical care or school or anything like this, or to go on about their life. How do you end this occupation? How do you end the snatching of young men and women that the Israelis kill and then they keep their body? I have two relatives, one in June of 2020 and one a few months later, a man and a woman in my village, in Abu Dis. They kill them and they keep their body under pretext. It's nonsense why they killed them. They were innocent passerby. So these are the issues out of it. It's not whether, the Palestinians are divided. Certainly the Palestinians are divided. The issue of how we are divided in the United States of America, we could write volumes, the issue of why the pro-Israel groups and so on are so powerful. That's also a very complex issue to delve in and so on. Certainly divisions are terrible, and we should unite around issues of human rights and so on, not only on the issue of Palestine, and find ways and means, to advocate for this and find ways and means to actually, coalesce with groups like, Black Lives Matter, like Latinos. I mean, we marched with Cesar Chavez in the 70s and so on. We went with the strikes that happened everywhere and so on. So yes, these are all issues that are important, but I think it is unfair to say that Hamas or any other Palestinian group stands in the way of the two-state solution.
When we come back, we have two questions for Dr. Roth. One question is about the dynamics of the US Congress and how that dynamics is not helping. And secondly, what Mr. Arikat just said about the first step, urgent step, which is to remove or to lift the siege of Gaza. When we come back after the break.
Ziyad brand, quality products from our family to yours. Ziyad Brothers Importing offers the finest quality products, including brands like Sultan, Kraft, Nestle, Hook, Rico Picon, Donna, and many more. Ask your retailer to carry these fine products because you deserve the very best. For more information, visit our website at www.ziyad.com. That's www.ziyad.com. Ziyad, quality products from our family to yours.
At Top Rehab Physical Therapy Clinic in Dearborn, we provide effective physical therapy sessions in order to limit pain and discomfort. Top Rehab provides physical therapy care for any diagnosis prescribed by a physician, and we regularly see and treat conditions such as stroke, TMJ, fibromyalgia, sciatica, joint pain, and more. We use a variety of pain management methods, including modalities, soft tissue mobilization, and therapeutic exercise. If you're in need of physical rehabilitation or physical therapy, get the highest quality health care at Top Rehab. Most insurance is accepted, and we're open Monday, Wednesday, and Friday 8 to 6, Tuesday and Thursday 8 to 5, and Saturday 10 till 2. Call for an appointment today at 313-846-0555. That's 313-846-0555. Choose Top Rehab Physical Therapy Clinic on Michigan Avenue in Dearborn. Life's too short to be in pain. Enjoy the first Syrian-style cuisine in Michigan. At Damas Cuisine and Catering, you'll find a wide selection of Syrian foods and sweets in our menu, like frikeh, hoizi, grape leaves with steak, mashawi platter, hot mahashi, char-grilled kebab, shawarma, and much more. Get super fast delivery from Damas Cuisine and Catering right to your door. Order online at damascuisine.com/menu and track your order live. Damas Cuisine and Catering, 28841 Orchard Lake Road in Farmington Hills. Call 248-987-4985.
When you're looking for the best in optical care, Dr. EMAD NAKKASH is your doctor to see. With years of experience and thousands of successful procedures performed, you can trust your eyes to Dr. EMAD NAKKASH. See Dr. EMAD NAKKASH and his professional staff for your eye care needs. There's 2 locations to serve you. In Hazel Park, call 248-336-3937. 248-336-3937. In Rochester Hills, call 248-299-3937. That's 248-299-3937.
I am Atef Gawad. Join me the first Friday of each month at 8 a.m. Eastern Time. I will be discussing some of the most important issues and events in the Middle East live on America's Voice of the Arabs. WNZK 690 AM and WDMV 700 AM.
Welcome back to Radio Baladi. We are discussing the two-state solution. And Dr. Roth, as you just heard, Mr. Hanania talked about the dynamics in the U.S. Congress, and Mr. Arikat called for lifting the siege on Gaza as a first step before we start talking about Hamas being an obstacle to peace or to the two-state solution. What do you think of those 2 points?
Well, on the latter point, which is conceptually easier, I think that although Hamas is in certain ways an obstacle to a comprehensive settlement, it's not necessarily an obstacle to the fundamental things that need to be done to deal with the humanitarian situation in Gaza. I think that there has been demonstrated over time a sufficient level of pragmatism on the part of the Hamas leadership to be a partner in making certain kinds of accommodations that would make it possible to greatly improve the quality of life for Palestinians in the Gaza Strip without being a threat to vital interests on the Israeli side. I think that there were more will on the Israeli side to engage in those kinds of discussions that this could be brought about. But the further question has to do with, I think, this fundamental commitment to the idea of a Jewish and a democratic state. And the interesting thing about that is the way in which people have wrestled with and rationalized the contradictions inherent in that concept. That, in fact, for most of the Jewish community, its support for Israel is predicated on the idea that Israel represents not simply the ethno-national project of Jews, but rather represents a democratic ideal. And in order for people to be able to maintain support for this, they have had to systematically avert their eyes from many of the consequences of Zionism on the ground from the very beginning. So I think it's very important to distinguish between what I would call the project of Jewish self-determination in Palestine, which is a vital interest for Jews both in the region and without, versus what I would call actually existing Zionism, which is the actual practices of displacement of Palestinians that has gone hand in hand with that project, and looking to the possibilities of other ways of conceptualizing Jewish self-determination in Palestine that can be reconciled in a more honest way with Palestinian self-determination. Just as self-determination in other parts of the world have come to be understood in different ways. If you look at something like the Good Friday Agreement in Northern Ireland, reconceptualizing what it means to be of a particular identity and how it is that you could create a home for people who think of themselves as British or Irish or both, as the Good Friday Agreement establishes. So the question is then, how does one reconceptualize the situation in ways that make it possible and give the political space for people in the US Congress to embrace different and more creative approaches to this situation? Because as it stands now, the bottom line is the association of Jewish survival with a system of domination, one in which there is this real sleight of hand where the situation in the territories is thought of as an occupation when that's convenient to the project of saying that what goes on behind the green line in Israel proper is somehow pristine and democratic. Whereas when you look at the situation on the ground in the territories, it systematically violates the international law that pertains to occupation. So one needs to think about these things in a way that breaks down these artificial boundaries, these artificial categories, and starts to get at the question of what satisfies the most essential needs of both populations and what makes it possible to understand human security in equal terms, not simply saying that Israeli security is non-negotiable and what happens to Palestinians is whatever happens to follow from the guarantee of Israeli security.
Before I ask Mr. Hanania about the wave of normalization between Arab states and Israel, I want to ask Mr. Arikat if you have any comment on what Dr. Roth just said.
I'm in a great deal of agreement with what he said. Look, this is a very complex and very difficult issue. The issue of Jewish democracy for Jews only, and then denying that democracy for everybody else that lives under the authority of that Jewish state, as we have seen, as recently as in May, when divisions and conflict was clear and rife and erupted among Palestinians who are Israeli citizens and Israelis who are Jewish and so on. We've seen that. So this democracy that is being talked about, the Jewish democracy, is something that needs to be looked at and determined on its own merit, so to speak. How is that democracy is playing out or being implemented and so on? But on the other hand, I think there are some scholars and so on. Peter Beinart has spoken last year, and he continues to speak on how you can deal with this issue, how you can bring about some sort of equality under the law. Now we're talking about equality under the law for all Palestinians and Jews and so on, because that is really the only solution going forward. You cannot have occupation on and military presence and on a group of people and then claim democracy because you are live in your own sort of democratic oasis in Tel Aviv and all that.
Mr. Hanania, I have only 1 minute left, so you need to be brief. In the face of that wave of normalization between Arab states and Israel, should the Palestinians have developed a new strategy, and what that strategy might look like?
I think what we're seeing is not just normalization. What we're seeing is a deterioration of Arab world support for the Palestinians. They've had enough. They're going to change. And we feel betrayed by that as Palestinians. But I still believe it's us. I still believe that we cling to the emotion rather than the practical aspects of politics. 435 members of Congress. If all we had to do, if we could win 225 members of Congress to support us, we could get what we want done. And we can't do that because we don't engage in politics. What we do engage in is the emotions that drives the violence in the Middle East. And what Israel's apartheid government does is horrible, and this country supports it. So we need to change how this country supports Israel.
Ray Hanania, thank you very much. I also would like to thank Dr. Brad Roth and Mr. Said Arikat. And We'll see you again the first Friday next month. Have a good weekend, all of you.
Thank you.
Thank you.